humans stayed beside the silent alien girl, only to learn anyone who witnessed her curse must die. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Tom Harris had always lived a relatively simple life, working as a systems engineer in a quiet corner of Earth. He never expected that his next assignment would lead him to something so extraordinary, something that would change his life forever. Tom had been called to assist with a unique scientific research project that involved studying an alien artifact. But what he didn't know was that the artifact was no object at all. It was Zara Lee, a silent alien girl whose very presence was shrouded in mystery and danger. Zara Lee was a creature of otherworldly beauty, her skin a vibrant shade of green, her silver hair flowing like liquid moonlight, and her eyes a piercing yellow that seemed to shimmer with untold knowledge. She was unlike anything Tom had ever seen, and though she appeared gentle and serene, there was an undeniable aura of sorrow and isolation about her. The researchers who had studied her had all warned him to keep his distance, to never get too close, but Tom's curiosity got the better of him. There was something about Zara Lee, something that drew him in despite the danger surrounding her. As he spent more time with her, Tom discovered that Zara Lee was cursed. A curse so ancient and powerful that it made anyone who witnessed it fall victim to death itself. Her silence was a key part of the curse. If anyone heard her speak or saw her in her true form, they were doomed to die. Yet, despite the fear and warnings, Tom couldn't bring himself to abandon her. He couldn't turn his back on someone so alone, so tragic, and so deeply misunderstood. Each day, he found himself returning to her, unable to resist the pull she had over him. He began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this curse than what had been told. What he didn't know was that as he spent more time with Zara Lee, the curse began to take hold of him in ways he never imagined. His days were filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, the knowledge that death was drawing closer with every passing moment. But Tom didn't care. He had already come to realize that Zara Lee wasn't just a victim of her curse, she was a victim of a cruel fate, and he couldn't abandon her now. His mind raced as he tried to figure out how to break the curse, but the answers seemed just out of reach. All he knew was that his time with Zara Lee was running out, and he had to act quickly before the curse claimed them both. What would happen next? Would Tom be able to save Zara Lee, or would they both fall victim to the deadly power that surrounded her? Only time would tell. Days passed in a blur for Tom Harris as he continued his work alongside Zara Lee, the silent alien girl whose curse had bound her to a life of solitude and fear. The researchers who had originally assigned him to the project had long since avoided her, but Tom couldn't bring himself to stay away. He found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength, the way she held herself despite the terror that surrounded her. Her silence was more than just a lack of words, it was a powerful presence, one that seemed to echo the weight of centuries of suffering. Tom had begun to suspect that the curse wasn't just something mystical or ancient, but something far more complex, and he was determined to uncover its secrets. He'd been working late into the night on his findings, piecing together ancient texts and records about the alien race Zara Lee came from, hoping to find a way to break the curse. Yet, no matter how much he studied, he couldn't find anything definitive. The curse seemed to be as much a part of Zara Lee as her blood, an intrinsic element of her very existence. As the days went by, Tom noticed subtle changes in Zara Lee. She began to trust him more, her once guarded demeanor softening just slightly. She would follow him around the lab, watching him as he worked, her yellow eyes full of curiosity. There were moments when she would reach out to touch his arm or stand closer to him, and though she never spoke, Tom could feel a strange bond growing between them. It was as though she was silently begging him to understand her, to help her. One evening, as Tom was leaving the lab, he found Zara Lee sitting in the corner, her face hidden behind her silver hair. There was an unmistakable sadness in her posture, a weight that seemed almost unbearable. Tom couldn't help but approach her, his heart aching for her in a way he hadn't expected. Zara Lee, he said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Is there something you want to tell me? For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, Zara Lee lifted her head, her eyes locking with his. The intensity in her gaze was enough to make Tom's breath catch in his throat. She didn't speak, but her eyes seemed to convey 1,000 words. It was then that Tom realized how much she longed to be free from the curse, how much she wanted to live without the fear of death hanging over her every moment. His heart sank. He knew that helping her wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't walk away now. I'll find a way, he whispered, almost to himself. I promise I'll find a way. Zara Lee's eyes softened, and for the first time, Tom saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. It was enough to make his resolve even stronger. He wouldn't let her suffer alone, not when there was still a chance to break the curse and set her free. But as the days wore on, Tom began to notice something else. The curse was not just affecting Zara Lee, it was beginning to affect him too. He couldn't explain it, but the closer he got to her, the more he felt a sense of unease creeping over him. He began to hear strange whispers in the dark, and the shadows in the lab seemed to stretch longer than they should. Was the curse trying to claim him as well? Was it inevitable that anyone who became too close to Zara Lee would fall victim to it? Tom didn't know, but he couldn't turn back now. He had already come too far. He was in this with Zara Lee, and he would stay by her side until the curse was broken, no matter the cost. The weeks passed by. In a haze for Tom, as he continued to spend every moment he could with Zara Lee. The curse that bound her to silence was becoming more real, and every day that he stayed by her side, the danger grew. But Tom couldn't abandon her now, not when he was beginning to understand the depth of her struggle. Zara Lee, the alien girl with her vibrant green skin and silver hair, had become more than just a subject of his research. She had become someone he cared about, someone he wanted to protect. Tom had spent countless nights poring over the ancient texts he had gathered, trying to find a way to break the curse. He had grown obsessed, but with each passing day, the sense of dread only deepened. The whispers in the lab grew louder, and the shadows seemed to stretch farther, as though the curse was growing more powerful. Tom knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, but he couldn't tell anyone about Zara Lee. The research team was already suspicious of his constant visits to the isolated lab where she was kept, and if they found out the truth, it could jeopardize everything. Tom felt trapped. He couldn't leave her. He had to stay, to protect her, but the cost was becoming too high. One night, as Tom sat beside Zara Lee, reviewing some old research notes, he noticed something strange. The room had grown colder, and Zara Lee's usual calm demeanor was replaced with a quiet tension. Her yellow eyes flickered toward him, and for the first time in days, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. Tom was startled by the contact, but as he looked into her eyes, he saw something new, a glimmer of hope, a flicker of trust. She wasn't just a victim of the curse anymore. She was beginning to trust him, to believe that he could help her. Tom knew that this was a turning point. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever the curse was, whatever it took, he had to find a way to break it. But there was a new urgency now. The closer he got to Zara Lee, the more he felt the weight of the curse pressing on him. It wasn't just her life that was at risk anymore, it was his too. As the days wore on, Tom began to see the toll the curse was taking on Zara Lee. The silence was no longer just a lack of speech, it was a barrier, a wall that she had built around herself to protect the people she cared about. The curse made her isolate herself from the world, and Tom could feel that isolation now. She was shutting down, retreating into herself, afraid that anyone who got too close would die because of her. The fear in her eyes was heartbreaking. It was a pain Tom couldn't begin to understand, but he knew he had to find a way to fix it. He couldn't let her live in fear forever. That night, as he sat by her side, Tom made a promise to himself. He would not let the curse claim her, and he would not let it take him either. He would find a way to break it, no matter the cost. The path ahead was uncertain, but Tom was more determined than ever. The stakes were higher now, and with every passing moment, he felt the weight of the curse closing in on him. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when Zara Lee had finally started to trust him. He wasn't sure what the next step would be, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't giving up on her. Zara Lee's fate was now intertwined with his own, and he would do whatever it took to save her. Tom had spent countless hours searching for a solution, poring over every available resource, but the curse that had bound Zara Lee remained as elusive as ever. He had tried every approach he could think of, but every step seemed to lead him in circles. The weight of his failure was starting to wear him down, and as the days passed, the fear that had once been distant now pressed closer. He could see it in Zara Lee's eyes, the growing sense of hopelessness that was beginning to consume her. She was still silent, still trapped within herself, and Tom knew that every moment she spent in that cage of her own making was another moment that pulled her further away from the person she could be. But he couldn't give up. No matter how much he wished for answers, no matter how much the curse seemed to mock his every effort, he had to keep trying. He had to keep believing that there was a way to break it. One evening, as Tom sat beside Zara Lee, deep in thought, he felt the air shift. There was a sudden stillness, a quiet weight that seemed to settle between them. Zara Lee, who had been avoiding his gaze for days, finally looked up at him. Her yellow eyes were filled with an intensity that startled him, and for a brief moment, he saw something there, something that wasn't just sorrow, but a silent plea for help. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. Tom's heart skipped a beat, but he held her gaze, refusing to look away. In that moment, he knew that Zara Lee was no longer just a mystery to be solved. She was a person who was suffering, and he was the one who had the power to help her. "I won't leave you," Tom whispered, his voice soft but steady. "I don't care what it takes. We'll figure this out together." Zara Lee didn't speak, but her grip tightened on his hand, and Tom felt a flicker of hope. He could see that she was starting to believe him, starting to trust that he was willing to go through whatever it took to save her. But the truth was, Tom wasn't sure what that whatever would look like. As much as he wished for a simple solution, he knew that there was no easy way out of this. The curse was too old, too powerful. The more he learned, the more he realized that breaking it wouldn't just be a matter of finding a magic word or an ancient artifact. No, the curse had deep roots, and those roots were tangled in Zara Lee's very being. If he was going to save her, he would need to get to the heart of what had caused the curse in the first place. It wasn't enough to just find a way to break the curse, it was about understanding the curse itself, understanding Zara Lee's people and their history, their beliefs, and the deep-seated fears that had led to this moment. He had to dig deeper than he ever thought possible. And so, with renewed determination, Tom set to work once more. But this time, it wasn't just about finding answers, it was about finding a way to reach Zara Lee, to show her that she didn't have to carry the weight of this curse alone. He would find a way to break it. He would find a way to give her a life beyond silence, beyond fear. He just had to believe that it was possible. And with every hour he spent by her side, he could feel the weight of the curse lifting just a little bit more, as if the world itself was starting to shift. There was hope yet. The path ahead was unclear, but Tom knew one thing: as long as he was with Zara Lee, he would fight for her. No curse, no force in the universe could take that away. Tom had spent weeks studying the ancient texts, working tirelessly, hoping to find any clue that could break Zara Lee's curse. But the more he uncovered, the more he realized that the solution wasn't something written down or buried in some forgotten tomb. It wasn't something that could be solved by sheer knowledge alone. The curse was as much a part of Zara Lee as her very being, woven into her existence like a dark thread. No, the answer lay somewhere deeper, beyond the reach of ancient records and dusty libraries. As the days passed, Tom could feel the weight of Zara Lee's curse growing heavier. He saw it in her eyes, the quiet despair that had started to take root in her once vibrant spirit. She wasn't the same girl who had first trusted him with her silence. The curse had stolen that light from her, replaced it with a hollow emptiness that mirrored the quiet stillness around her. Tom knew that the curse wasn't just a punishment for Zara Lee, it was a punishment for anyone who dared to be close to her. And that was the part that terrified him the most. He could feel it creeping into his own soul, the curse's influence drawing closer every day. But he refused to let it consume him. He had made a promise to Zara Lee, and he would see it through to the end. One night, as the moonlight bathed the lab in a soft glow, Tom sat beside Zara Lee, his mind racing. She was so still, so quiet, her yellow eyes staring out at nothing. For a moment, Tom wondered if she had given up entirely, resigned to the fate that the curse had dealt her. But then, just as he was about to speak, Zara Lee did something unexpected. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his arm. The simple gesture, so small and fragile, sent a shock through Tom's heart. He looked down at her, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with a quiet desperation, a plea for help that she could never put into words. She had been suffering for so long, and now, Tom could feel that suffering in the very air between them. For the first time, Zara Lee wasn't just the alien girl with a curse, she was a person who needed him. And that realization hit him harder than any discovery he had made in his research. This wasn't just about breaking a curse anymore. This was about saving Zara Li's soul, about giving her a chance at a life beyond fear and silence. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The answer was out there, somewhere. He just had to find it. As he gazed down at her, he made another promise, this one even stronger than the first. He wouldn't let her face this alone. Whatever it took, he would break the curse. They would find a way. The next morning, Tom woke with a sense of renewed purpose. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had to keep moving forward. He couldn't let Zara Lee slip away into the shadows of her curse. As he gathered his notes and research, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey ahead. The path would be long, and the risks were greater than ever. But as he looked at Zara Lee, her quiet presence still beside him, he knew there was no turning back now. He had made his choice. He would fight for her, no matter the cost. Tom's resolve only deepened as the days went by. He had been chasing a solution, poring over every possible clue, every hint, every scrap of information he could find about the curse that had gripped Zara Lee. But despite his tireless efforts, the answer remained just out of reach, taunting him like an unreachable star. Zara Lee, still silent and still bound by the curse, had become more than just a mystery. She was a person, someone who needed him, someone who had started to trust him, and in that trust, he found the strength to keep going. He could feel her pain, her isolation, every time she looked at him with those sad, pleading eyes. It was as if the weight of the universe rested on his shoulders. She had been alone for so long, and now that she had found someone who cared, he couldn't let her down. But as the weeks wore on, the curse was taking its toll on Tom too. He could feel its presence, seeping into his mind, his thoughts. The whispers were growing louder, the darkness pressing in. Every night, as he sat beside Zara Lee, he wondered if it was too late for both of them. But then, in the quiet of those moments, he would look at her, and the resolve would return. He couldn't let her face this alone. Not now. Not ever. One evening, as the last rays of the setting sun filtered through the lab's windows, Tom found himself lost in thought, staring at the data he had gathered. Zara Lee was sitting across from him, as still as ever, her yellow eyes trained on him. The silence was heavy, and for a moment, Tom felt as though the weight of her curse had wrapped itself around him too. But then, as if sensing his thoughts, Zara Lee reached out and touched his hand. The simple contact, so fragile, yet filled with so much meaning, made his heart skip a beat. He looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she gave him a small smile. It was the faintest of expressions, but it was enough. In that moment, Tom realized that Zara Lee wasn't giving up. She was still fighting, still holding on, and she had placed her trust in him. That trust meant more to him than anything. He would not fail her. He couldn't. The next morning, after a restless night filled with dreams of shadows and whispers, Tom woke up with a new sense of determination. He had been researching everything, old texts, alien histories, and even mythologies that he once thought irrelevant. But now, he realized that these ancient stories might hold the key. They spoke of a forgotten ritual, one that could break even the most powerful of curses, but it required something he hadn't anticipated, a personal sacrifice. Tom didn't know if he was ready for that, but he knew that if he wanted to save Zara Lee, he had to try. As he sat with her later that day, poring over the texts again, he saw the glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was faint, but it was there. She was starting to believe that they could find a way out. And for the first time in weeks, Tom allowed himself to believe it too. The path ahead was uncertain, and the risks were greater than ever, but Tom was ready. He would face whatever challenges came their way. He would not back down. Not now. Not when Zara Lee was counting on him. Tom spent the next few days immersed in his research, searching for the final pieces of the puzzle that would free Zara Lee from her curse. The ritual he had discovered was no ordinary incantation or ancient artifact, it was a deeply personal process, one that required not only knowledge but also an understanding of the bond between him and Zara Lee. The curse, he realized, had been more than just a magical affliction. It was a reflection of her own inner turmoil, her isolation, and her fear of the very thing that had been keeping her silent all this time. As Tom continued to study the ritual, he understood the weight of what it asked. It wasn't just about breaking the curse, it was about understanding Zara Lee on a level deeper than he had ever imagined. The curse had been born out of her deepest fears, her feelings of guilt, and the belief that anyone close to her would suffer. And to break it, Tom would have to confront those very emotions alongside her. The ritual required the participation of both parties, a mutual commitment to face the fears that had created the curse in the first place. As the days passed, Tom grew more anxious. He knew that if they were going to attempt the ritual, they had to be ready. But how could they prepare for something so unknown, so unpredictable? Every moment they spent together, every glance, every quiet word exchanged, made it clear that the bond between them was real. But was it enough? Would it be strong enough to break the curse? Zara Lee had shown him trust, something she had not shown anyone in years, and in return, Tom had promised to help her, to stand by her side no matter what. But now, faced with the reality of the ritual, Tom was starting to question if he was strong enough to follow through. He knew the risks. There was no guarantee that the ritual would work. There was even the possibility that it might make things worse. But despite his fears, he couldn't walk away. Not when he had already come so far. That night, as the lab grew dark and the only light came from the flickering screens of his research, Tom sat across from Zara Lee. She had been quiet, as always, but there was something different in the way she looked at him. For the first time, she seemed to be waiting for him to say something, to make a decision. He reached out, taking her hand in his. It was warm, though not as much as he had expected, and it trembled slightly as he held it. Zara Lee, he said softly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I think we're ready. She didn't say anything, but her grip tightened, and her eyes met his. In that moment, Tom knew that they had no other choice. The ritual was their only hope. He wasn't sure if it would work, but he was sure of one thing, he couldn't let her face it alone. Together, they would face the curse and whatever else came their way. He stood up, pulling Zara Lee gently to her feet. We're doing this, he said firmly, his voice full of resolve. She nodded, her expression unreadable, but the trust in her eyes spoke volumes. Tom felt a surge of hope, tempered by the weight of what they were about to undertake. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he would see it through. For her. For them. As he prepared for the ritual, Tom realized that it wasn't just about breaking a curse. It was about breaking free. Breaking free from the fears that had held them both captive for so long. And no matter what happened, he was ready to face it, together with Zara Lee. The room was silent, the only sound being the soft hum of the machines that surrounded them. Tom stood beside Zara Lee, his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared for the ritual. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he couldn't afford to let fear take hold. This was their only chance, and he had promised her, he wouldn't break that promise. Zara Lee stood motionless, her yellow eyes fixed on him, as if she was trying to read his thoughts. Despite her silence, Tom could feel her presence, her hope, her uncertainty. She was trusting him. With her life, with the curse that had defined her existence for so long. The ritual was simple in theory, but Tom knew that it wasn't just a matter of following instructions. It required something far deeper, something that neither of them could predict. They had to confront the curse together, not just in body, but in mind and soul. Tom took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Zara Lee didn't answer, but she nodded slightly, her grip tightening around his hand. That was all the confirmation he needed. With a final glance at the research notes he had collected over the past few weeks, Tom began to set the ritual in motion. He followed the steps carefully, the symbols glowing faintly on the walls as he activated the ancient technology. The air grew thicker, charged with energy, as if the very fabric of reality was shifting around them. Tom could feel the pull of the curse, the weight of it pressing against his chest, threatening to break him down. But he refused to let it. Zara Lee was beside him, her presence a quiet strength that kept him grounded. As the ritual progressed, the connection between them deepened. Tom could feel the curse's power trying to reach into him, to claim him as it had claimed so many before. But each time it touched him, he pushed back, focusing on the bond he shared with Zara Lee. She wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't alone anymore. They were in this together. The energy in the room intensified, and for a moment, Tom thought he might be swallowed by it. But then, just as quickly, the pressure released, and the room fell silent again. He opened his eyes, unsure of what had just happened. Zara Lee stood beside him, still as ever, but something was different. The curse's hold on her seemed weaker, less oppressive. The silence that had once been so heavy now felt less suffocating. Tom reached out, touching her arm gently. "Zara Lee," he whispered, his voice trembling. She turned to face him, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, her eyes were clear, no longer clouded by fear or guilt. She smiled at him, a small, fragile smile, but one filled with gratitude. Tom's heart swelled with relief, but there was no time to savor the moment. The curse wasn't gone, not completely, but for the first time, they had a chance. And that was enough. Together, they would face whatever came next. Tom knew that this was only the beginning of their journey, but with Zara Lee by his side, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed the ritual were filled with a quiet sense of relief, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were only just beginning to understand the true depth of the curse that had bound Zara Lee for so long. Despite the subtle change in her, the silence she carried with her remained, but it was no longer oppressive. It was as if the curse had loosened its grip, but not entirely. There was still something lingering, something not yet fully resolved. Tom watched Zara Lee as she sat by the window, her yellow eyes gazing out at the horizon. The light of the setting sun cast a warm glow across her face, and for the first time, she seemed truly at peace. The bond between them had only grown stronger, and Tom knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but it was a journey they would face together. He approached her, sitting beside her at the window. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Zara Lee turned her head to look at him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes spoke volumes. She didn't answer with words, but she didn't need to. The trust they shared was enough. Tom could feel it in the air between them, a connection stronger than any words could convey. She was no longer the silent, fearful girl he had first met. She had begun to find her voice, and though it wasn't always in words, Tom could see the change in her. She was learning to trust again, and that trust was something Tom would never take for granted. As the days turned into weeks, they continued their research, seeking more answers about the curse. The more they learned, the more they realized that the curse wasn't just an ancient affliction. It was a manifestation of Zara Lee's deepest fears, her guilt, and her belief that she was unworthy of love or connection. The curse had been born out of her pain, and to truly break it, they had to confront that pain head-on. Together, they dug deeper into Zara Lee's past, uncovering long-buried memories, some of which were painful to revisit. But with each step, they grew stronger, more united in their mission. They were no longer just trying to break a curse, they were healing, not only Zara Lee's past but their future as well. As they worked side by side, Tom couldn't help but feel a growing sense of purpose. They were a team now, bound not only by the curse but by their shared determination to find a way forward. For the first time in a long while, Tom allowed himself to imagine a future where the curse no longer defined Zareli's life. A future where she could be free to live, to love, and to find happiness. It was a distant dream, but it was a dream that felt possible. And as he looked at Zareli, her eyes filled with quiet determination, Tom knew that they would face whatever challenges came their way. Together, they would fight for that future. No curse, no fear, no obstacle would ever stand in their way again.